The story we have for you today deals with a middle-aged lady who suffers through 7 years of torment, only to be found dead in British Columbia under mysterious circumstances. So, if you're a fan of this type of content, please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future uploads. On June 8, 1989, just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, the body of Cindy James was found outside an abandoned house. Cindy was a 44-year-old nurse from Vancouver and had last been seen about 2 weeks prior as she left the home she shared with a roommate to go get groceries. She was hog-tied, meaning her hands and feet were bound behind her back, and a black woman's stocking was tied tightly around her neck. After an inquest, the medical examiner and the inquest jury both believed Cindy died of an unknown event. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack was born in British Columbia on June 12, 1944, one of 6 children born to Otto and Tilly Hack. The family moved around a lot due to her father being in the Canadian military. Cindy had a good relationship with her parents, even though her father was very strict with her and her siblings, and used corporal punishment when needed. Cindy found herself doing chores more than associating with her siblings or other kids. Her childhood was filled with loneliness, and she looked forward to striking out on her own. She finally got her chance in 1962, when she was 18, moving to Vancouver and enrolling in nursing school. About that time, her father re-enlisted in the Canadian Air Force and moved the rest of the family to France, where Cindy would come visit each year during the holidays. Cindy would often refer to an intern she met at school, to whom she would become engaged and would later develop terminal cancer and take his own life while on a skiing trip. Cindy never revealed his name, nor did she bring him along to France to visit the family. In summer 1965, Cindy began a romantic relationship with Roy Makepeace, a South African psychiatrist 18 years older who was an assistant professor. She graduated with a bachelor's of nursing degree in the summer of 1966, and she and Roy wed on December 9th of that year. When she told her parents, they weren't even aware she had been engaged. Cindy's parents were concerned about the age difference. They believe Roy was taking advantage of Cindy's, quote, gullibility, unquote. Their marriage was not a good one. Over the years, Roy noted that her behavior became erratic and confusing. She would scream and yell and hit him for no reason. But on the flip side, Cindy would confide to her friends that Roy was abusive and hit her often, which Roy denied. Up until 1975, Cindy had worked at the Vancouver General Hospital until she was hired as a team coordinator at the Blenheim House, a facility for children with behavior disorders. During her 12 years at Blenheim House, co-workers described Cindy as competent and professional. In the summer of 1982, Roy and Cindy separated, and their divorce progressed quickly. Cindy found a place of her own. 4 months later, the nightmare began. In late September, Cindy began hearing noises outside of her home at night, leading her to believe a prowler had been lurking about. On October 7th, the first phone call came in. Several more followed, at all hours, day or night. The caller had a deep, raspy voice, and always addressed her by name. Some were outright threatening. Others were just deep, heavy breathing on the other end. Most were sexual and violent in nature. When the caller did speak, they always told Cindy not to tell anyone. That evening, she had the unnerving sense that she was being watched. As soon as she walked to the window and closed the curtain, the phone rang. The same voice told her,
"Don't think pulling the drapes means I don't know you're in there."
On October 11th, She reported the calls to the RCMP. They paid a visit to Cindy's home, and with no real evidence to go on, suggested she get an unlisted number and keep a log of each call. Not long after the officer left, the phone rang. The voice on the other end said,
"You fucking bitch. I'll get you."
On the afternoon of the 13th, the caller told her,
"So you think calling the police will keep you safe? You just wait. I've got my zipper open. I'm talking to my throbbing."
at which time Cindy abruptly hung up. 2 days later, she called the RCMP for a prowler who had smashed out her porch lights and cut her phone line. On October 19th, Cindy went to dinner with her friend Agnes Woodcock. When they both returned to Cindy's house that evening, the door was wide open. A rock had been thrown through a window, and all the pillows on Cindy's bed had been slashed with a knife. The culprit had left the front door key on the bedside table. She immediately reported this to the RCMP, who sent out an officer to take a report. One of the RCMP officers, Patrick McBride, suspected that Roy was behind everything. However, he denied any involvement. As Patrick became more and more involved in the case, a next-door neighbor reported to him that they had seen this man standing outside of the house on 3 different occasions, although the description did not even come close to resembling Roy. Before long, Patrick and Cindy began a romantic relationship, which lasted most of the next year. Patrick, who had separated from his wife to be with Cindy, moved into Cindy's spare bedroom on October 31st, 1982. Several days later, Patrick found Roy sitting in a vehicle parked in the alley behind the house. He immediately questioned Roy, who admitted he was there without Cindy's knowledge, saying he was trying to catch the perpetrator in the act, and he immediately left when he was told to. Patrick claimed to have witnessed one call while Cindy was there, and heavy breathing could be heard on the other end, as well as a female voice over a PA system. This led Patrick to believe that the call came from an airport, although it ended up being traced to somewhere in the Vancouver suburb of Richmond. Notes started to appear, mostly cut and paste letters from magazines or newspapers. In November, Cindy found one of these notes showing a photo of a corpse in a morgue. In late November, Patrick found the phone line to the house had been cut in 5 places. In early December, Patrick proposed. Cindy declined, and she asked Patrick to move out, although the couple would continue to see each other. Over Christmas week, she found a note outside saying,
"Merry Christmas,"
with a picture of a woman with her throat cut. The note was stained with red ink. On January 27th, 1983, Cindy's friend Agnes came over to Cindy's house and ended up finding Cindy in the backyard, unconscious, with a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. When she awoke, she said she was walking to the garage when someone hit her from behind and carried her into the garage, where a second man strangled her and sexually assaulted her. She didn't get a good look at either man. She only remembered the one was wearing white sneakers. They told her that if she reported it to the authorities, they would kill her sister, Melanie. At the hospital, the examining doctor found only superficial wounds and no evidence of sexual assault. The RCMP became skeptical about Cindy's claims. She had filed many reports with them on the alleged phone calls, threatening notes, and property damage, but there was never a shred of evidence found at any of the scenes, and nothing ever happened while the police had active surveillance going. They politely recommended she make an appointment with a psychiatrist, but Cindy declined. She did, however, see a general practitioner who did counseling on the side. Cindy moved to a new house in West Vancouver in February of 1983. Less than a week later, the notes caught up to her. She received a letter, again in the cut and paste fashion, that said,
"Run, rabbit, run. I'll show you how fucking good I am. Soon. Bang, bang. You're dead."
The calls found their way to Cindy's new house as well. She moved again in April. Roy, who was continuing his attempts to reconcile with Cindy, paid for her airfare to Indonesia to see her brother who was stationed there. The trip was a brief respite for her and a chance to relax and reset before returning to British Columbia. But a couple weeks after her return, on August 22nd, She found another handmade note, this time at her work, saying,
"Welcome back. Death, blood, hate."
Cindy had her car repainted and hired a private investigator, Ozzy Caban, who ended up working for Cindy for the final 6 years of her life. Cindy felt the police didn't believe her and weren't doing anything to catch her stalker. Ozzy gave Cindy a two-way radio as well as a panic button that, when pressed, alerted both the RCMP and himself. In October and November of 1983, 3 dead cats were found in her garden, each tied up with rope. The calls continued, some at work answered by Cindy's colleagues, who told the RCMP the caller never spoke. Initially, Ozzy felt, like the RCMP and even Cindy's parents, that she wasn't telling the whole story. Her parents believed she was withholding information to protect her sister. However, for Ozzy, this would change in January 1984. On the night of the 30th, Ozzy heard strange noises over Cindy's two-way radio. Immediately going to Cindy's house, Ozzy kicked the locked door in and found Cindy unconscious in the family room, with a note pinned to her hand with a paring knife. The note was again of the cut and paste type, saying,
"Now you must die."
She was still alive, however, her pulse was very weak. When Ozzy interviewed her at the hospital, the only recollection Cindy had was a man coming through the gate and hitting her over the head with an object. She said she felt a needle inserted into her arm. Upon examination, doctors did find a needle puncture mark in her right arm, but a toxicology screen found no drugs of any kind in her system. The only evidence found at the scene was circular smeared blood patterns on the floor. Cindy was asked to take a polygraph, which showed she was being truthful, but the polygraph test administrator, in his judgment, felt the test was at best inconclusive. Around this time, police started putting some pressure on Roy. Cindy had confided to detectives that she thought Roy was responsible for the harassment and the attacks. Over several interviews with police, Roy said that the mafia was responsible and that it was somehow tied to the Blenheim house. Cindy's father, Otto, wore a wire and talked to Roy himself. After hearing Roy's mafia angle, Otto told Roy not to contact his daughter again. Roy then sent a 6-page letter to Otto, pleading with him to get the police to investigate the mafia connection. On June 18th, a frantic Cindy called Ozzy, who raced to the home. When he got there, he found Cindy crouched down in the garden, claiming someone had been in the house. As he searched, he found Cindy's dog, Heidi, cowering under the basement steps, obviously abused and bound with a rope. A note saying,
"Happy birthday,"
was found right next to some sexually explicit pictures. A cigarette butt that was not Cindy's brand was found on the windowsill. Ozzy found the rope used to bind the dog was the same type used on the dead cats from the previous autumn. Given how bad a shape the dog was in, Ozzy thought it was impossible that Cindy could inflict that much damage on her own pet. Over the next several months, calls were coming in left and right. Ozzy answered one of these while Cindy was at work. Cindy continued to find notes, both at home and at work. 2 men showed up on Cindy's doorstep on July 1st, but quickly fled when she radioed Ozzy over the two-way radio. On July 23rd, Cindy was found trying to get into a neighbor's house, disoriented and with a gray stocking tied tightly around her neck. She said she had been walking her dog in Dunbar Park several hours before when a green van approached her. A bearded man was the driver, and he had a female passenger. All Cindy could remember was being hit over the head. At the hospital, doctors did find 2 needle marks in her arm, and oddly, a call was received by a man asking about hospital security procedures. The man had an accent, and when the authorities played Roy's voice to the nurse, she said there was a good chance that it was Roy. After returning home, the calls continued, although none were long enough to trace, as by this time authorities had tapped the phone, and round-the-clock surveillance turned up nothing. All of this eventually took its toll on Cindy, and in June 1985, Cindy was committed to a psychiatric unit. She had tried to take her own life by overdosing on prescription drugs. After leaving the psych unit, She received a package at her home the next month. It contained a dark nylon stocking as well as a note saying,
"Blood flowing freely."
On August 5th, she called authorities to respond to a fire in her home, which was quickly extinguished, and police found the cause to be some scattered newspaper that had ignited. She called police about another, similar fire the very next day. On the 21st, another fire started at about 4:40 a.m. When the police arrived, Cindy and Ozzy were in a heated argument. Cindy had said she had gone out walking the dog at about 3:15, and when she returned, the basement was on fire. A basement window was partially open, but the authorities could find no evidence of entrance or exit through it. Again, newspaper was found in the vicinity. Police and fire officials were starting to believe Cindy was starting these fires herself. Cindy was interviewed by a Dr. Marcus, a psychologist, by request of the RCMP, and it was his professional opinion that Cindy could be suffering from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, and that Cindy could be waging this war on herself. He believed the DID stemmed from a traumatic childhood incident, but for some reason, Cindy's childhood was not part of the interview. On December 1st, 1983, Cindy moved again, this time to Richmond. 10 days later, she was found at 6 p.m. going in and out of consciousness in a ditch 4 miles from her home. She was completely nude except for men's work boots and a single glove. The customary nylon stocking was tied around her neck, her body was covered in bruises and cuts, and she was suffering from hypothermia. Doctors theorized she had been tranquilized. Cindy had no idea what had happened or how she got to the ditch where she was found. After being released from the hospital, she flew out to spend Christmas with her brother, this time in Germany. On her return, she legally changed her last name from her married name, Makepeace, to James. Agnes Woodcock and her husband Tom started spending the night at Cindy's house occasionally, just so that Cindy could have a little peace of mind and finally get some sleep. In April 1986, the basement caught fire again. Cindy had awoken them after hearing someone in the house. The phone lines had been cut yet again, and the panic button was also disconnected. When Tom left to cross the street to the neighbors to get help, he saw a man standing on the sidewalk in front of the house. When Tom asked him to call for help, the man turned and ran. No evidence was found of forced entry, leading the RCMP to suspect Cindy had started the fire. The Woodcocks would have no part of that. Their friend would have never endangered their lives like that. Cindy stayed with the Woodcocks for a while, not eating and displaying suicidal ideations. A psychiatrist committed Cindy for 2 weeks, where doctors diagnosed her with anorexia and depression. According to a psychological report, Cindy answered questions with one-word responses. She had no eye contact and flat out refused to talk about some subjects. During this time, she was also diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoia. In future meetings during her 2-week stay, her condition did improve. The doctor noted she had a well above average IQ. She was released after 10 days, at which time she finally admitted to her father that she had been withholding vital information. She said she knew who was responsible for everything, the calls, the notes, the assaults, and the fires, but she would not reveal their identity. By August of 1987, Cindy was well enough to return to work at Richmond General Hospital as a nurse. But on the 28th, a back window at her house was broken, and on the 31st, she reported to the RCMP that the light bulbs over her porch had been loosened. A week later, she reported a hole in her basement door window. Someone had used a glass cutter on it. On October 11th, 1988, Roy, the ex-husband, received this on his answering machine. Another message from the same time, although no audio is available, said,
"More smack, more downer, another grand after we waste her. No more deal."
Roy gave these tapes to his attorney. He was reluctant to go to the RCMP as he thought he would be labeled as a suspect. On the 26th, Cindy was found in her garage, hogtied, unconscious, and nude from the waist down, with a black stocking tied around her neck. Electrical tape was used to tape her mouth shut. Again, she had no memory of what had happened. The RCMP brought in a knot expert to try to recreate the knots used in the latest incident. The knot expert concluded that it was highly unlikely that Cindy would be able to tie herself up in that position in that fashion. The RCMP were reluctant to pursue the investigation any farther. In April of 1989, Cindy, at that time working the night shift at the hospital, found the words,
"Sleep well,"
written in the morning dew on her windshield. On April 29th and May 10th, Cindy reported break-ins at her home. The RCMP used tracking dogs both times and were unable to find a scent trail. On May 29th, 1989, at 4 p.m., Cindy was seen at the hospital picking up her paycheck. She talked to a couple colleagues who reported Cindy was in a pretty good mood and that Cindy had said the activity around her house had died down. She was supposed to deposit her check, go grocery shopping, and then meet Agnes at Tom at her house at 10 o'clock. Cindy was last seen at the ATM machine at 8 p.m. When Cindy was not back home by 10 to meet Agnes and her husband, they called the RCMP to report her missing. Normally, a time period is required before a person is declared officially missing, but since Cindy and her numerous reports were well known to the RCMP, they immediately dispatched an officer to investigate. When her abandoned vehicle was found at the supermarket, the police found blood on the driver's side door, few bags of groceries, and a wrapped gift. The contents of her wallet were scattered under the vehicle. A search of her house found nothing out of the ordinary. On June 8, 1989, a construction worker found Cindy's decomposing body in the yard of an abandoned house. Again, she was hogtied, laying on her side with a black nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. The abandoned house was near a busy intersection, and there was frequent foot traffic through the area. Local teenagers would often use the abandoned home to throw parties and such. On the fuel tank outside the house, someone had written in orange spray paint,
"Some bitch died here."
A line using the same spray paint went out from the fuel tank to Cindy's body, then circled the body. A preliminary examination at the scene indicated that her hands were tied so tightly, one finger scratched another down to the bone. Forensics determined that the body had been at the site since June 2nd. An autopsy showed the cause of death as an overdose of morphine, as well as other drugs. She had 10 times the lethal dose of morphine in her system. It was unclear how the drugs were ingested, if they were injected or if they were taken orally. Morphine was found in her stomach, although a needle mark was found on her arm. Ozzy Caban, her private investigator, viewed Cindy's remains on June 10th and believed Cindy died elsewhere and was dumped at the abandoned house. He indicated the pooling of blood after death was on the left side of her body. Cindy had been found laying on her right side. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly deemed the death as and that Cindy ingested somehow a lethal combination of morphine and other drugs, laid on the ground, and tied herself up. Due to the huge amount of narcotics in her system, medical personnel could not determine just how long Cindy could remain functioning after ingesting. In 1990, an inquest was conducted with 5 jurors and 80 witnesses. It took 40 days to complete. In the end, the jury did not agree with the RCMP theory of However, they said that Cindy James had died of a, quote, unknown event, unquote. Over the course of 7 years, investigations of Cindy's claims had cost between $1 and $1.5 million to conduct, with not a shred of evidence ever found. They believe Cindy was somehow inventing these attacks, staging and perpetrating them on herself. Did Cindy have personality disorders that made her carry out years of torture and torment on herself? Would she have been coherent enough to hogtie herself after taking 10 times the lethal dose of morphine? Or did Cindy really have a stalker, someone who put her through 7 years of absolute hell before finally taking her life? These questions have been asked since 1989 and to this day have not been able to be answered with a concrete yes or no. That's it for this episode of the Sheldrake Files. We hope you liked the episode, so if you did, please hit that like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our future uploads. So now, for the Sheldrake Files, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.